In this video, we'll look at how we manually enter transactions to a tenancy. An example of this would be if we receive a cash payment from a tenant, or if we need to charge them for something like tenant damages. To add a transaction manually into a tenancy, from the home screen, we click the tenancy link in the toolbar and search for our tenant, Ian Moss. We double-click his row to open his tenancy screen, and in the middle section of the screen we see the tenancy transactions ledger, which shows us a history of all of the financial transactions between our organisation and our tenant. In Chintaro, we will usually use bulk functions for finance, both with charging rents and importing batch statements from Centerpay or a bank file, but there will be times when we need to enter a transaction manually. In this example, Ian has come into the office with $50 of cash towards his rent, and we now want to record this on his tenancy. To add a new transaction manually, we click on the Enter Transaction button and see the Transaction Details window pops up. First, we choose the transaction type, and this will be a rent payment, which is a credit to the tenant. The date will default to today's date, but we can delete this date and key in a past date, or use the calendar icon to select the date the payment was made. We'll enter the amount he paid as $50 and enter some comments. The comments section is where we generally put in how the payment was made, so we'll enter paid cash and click Add. Now we see our most recent transaction at the top of the ledger, and the running balance has changed to reflect the new payment. The overall tenancy transactions balance has been changed, and the transaction group balance of rent has also adjusted accordingly. Because Ian paid us cash, we now want to print a receipt for him, and after we've entered a transaction, we can print a receipt by double-clicking on the payment to bring up the transaction details pop-up window, and click the Print Receipt button. A receipt will open in Microsoft Word, where we see the details of the transaction, and we can print this for our tenant. Let's exit out of the receipt and exit out of the transaction details pop-up. We can also use the Enter Transaction button to manually charge tenants for a transaction. For example, if a client has caused damage to a property and we need to charge them to repay it. We click the same Enter Transaction button, but this time we select the transaction type of Tenant Maintenance Charge, which is a debit to the tenant. This charge may be under a different name in your system, for example, Tenant Damage, and your Chintaro system administrator can change the transaction name by going into System Maintenance and then Reference Tables. The date will leave as today's date and enter the amount of $150. In the comments, we'll enter Broken Window and click Add. We can now see the tenant maintenance charge at the top of the ledger, which has been allocated to the transaction group of damages, and we have a new transaction group balance for damages in the Balances section. If we double-click on the tenant maintenance charge, we can print an invoice for the transaction by clicking the Print Invoice button. We also have the ability to enter water charges from the tenancy transactions screen. To do this, we click the Enter Water Charge button and enter the relevant water charge fields. In this example, we'll only enter the total amount of $70, click Add, and we see the water balance appears at the top of the screen. Once we've entered a transaction, the only field we can change is the comments. If we double-click on any transaction and we click on any of the fields, transaction type, date or amount, nothing happens, but we can change the comments at any time. We'll have a look at how we can have Chintaro split payments to allocate to different transaction groups in a later video.